June 2508. If you please rise for a Pledge of Allegiance. Charlotte, please lead us, please.
Sure, please rise, place your hand over your heart and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Here.
Director Craven?
Yes, here.
Director Kelly?
Here.
Director Porcher?
Here. Okay, Sam McIntyre is an alternate. He's here, and I don't see any other alternates. Okay. Agenda review. Any?
Chair Mulhart, there are none.
Okay.
I do have one announcement, if I could.
Yes, please.
We have a new staff member that I want to introduce, Rick Vergoots, today, or actually this week, joined us as our groundwater section manager. Rick has 14 years of experience with geological work in Southern California. He has a bachelor's and master's degree in geology, and he's a California licensed professional geologist and certified engineering geologist. He worked with the LA Regional Board and recently comes to us from the city of LA. So
Very good. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Public comments. Anybody have anything that's not on the agenda? Board member comments.
Mr. Chairman, I have spoken to members of the Water Meter Committee, and they're, I'm hoping, look into the issue of the small meters, and maybe they will come back with a recommendation about very small pumpers or something. So I just wanted to bring that to our attention, so if they come back, you'll know why. Thank you.
Okay. Very good.
Chair, I had
yes.
a comment as well for the minutes, and you can wait if you wanted to. Just a couple of brief comments. I'm not sure I want to just sign off on the minutes as they're written.
Okay. We'll when we get to that item, let's pull it out of consent and just we'll talk about it. Okay. Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Item G is the consent agenda. There's one item on it, and we just heard that we want to discuss it, so we won't. We'll turn it into an action item.
It looks like there are two items, no?
On the consent items, there's only one. Approval of minutes.
Oh, that's... I'm in the minutes of the previous.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about that one. Before we call for a motion, let's just, Dave, go ahead and talk about the things you want to talk about.
Item number 5 in the minutes, entitled Priority Listing of Additional Work Tasks, though I think it's summarized fairly accurately, perhaps, at least in my opinion, gives the feeling or the assumption that all the board members were signing off on the idea that staff's prioritization of these additional work tasks, we were in agreement to that. And I'm not so sure that we were so much at all in agreement, and more to the effect that all of the tasks in themselves had items that, you know, kind of mix and mesh together, and there's probably a certain natural order that will develop as these things get looked into. So to say blanketly that we all agree with the idea that the staff prioritization of these additional work tasks, I don't think is maybe quite the feeling that we had in the last meeting.
Which line are you talking about where it says we all agreed?
This is page 3 of 4.
That I got.
Item number 5.
But which page?
Paragraph number 3.
3. But where does it say we all agreed with it?
The board members decided to use $50,000 for Thornhill Miller settlement, have agency staff utilize their judgment to prioritize the tasks, and expend up to $150,000 to complete the tasks. just in my interpretation of reading this paragraph,
Okay.
I think it's maybe not quite so accurate, a blanket summary of all the discussion that took place.
If to the minutes they added a line following that sentence, because I do recall we said something to the effect, if my memory serves me right, that staff will continuously come back to the board as they prioritize the task and update the board so adjustments can be made. I think that's kind of how we ended it, or at least we said that we want reports coming back on, I think we even said a quarterly basis. Maybe
Right.
if we added that, if they added that sentence in there or something to that effect, would that?
I'm not sure I'm even asking for a change. I just wanted to make it clear that there was more discussed during that whole issue item than kind of is occurring here. There was also significant mention with our budget and our funding of how we had surplus monies every year that it looked like we could fund all of these additional tasks within a couple of years, and that's not mentioned here either. That's just one thing I wanted to mention.
Okay.
So I'm not requiring any change there, but
Okay.
there's the last page where it says that I made a motion to pay down the gym's difference. I would prefer to see wording that said Director Borchard made the motion to refund the gyms by crediting the difference to future groundwater extraction bills.
Okay.
I think it's a little more accurate.
Okay. That would require a change to the minutes. Can we approve the minutes with that particular change in? I'm not hearing any wording on change paragraph other than the statements the director made. Are you okay with us approving these minutes with that change to paragraph 6, or do the minutes have to come back? Okay.
Could you restate your change, please?
In other words, it would say Director Borchard made the motion to refund the gyms by crediting the difference to future groundwater extraction bills. Right now it says to pay down the gyms, and I just don't think that's a very accurate way of saying what we're trying to do.
As second of that motion, I would
Okay.
concur with the
Hold on.
change.
Okay, Mike.
We're not the GEMS is a fund, and so I think we need to get more than just refund the GEMS. That would indicate to me that we're giving it all back, and that wasn't the motion.
You're right. I think you refund the portion or something to that effect would probably be more accurate.
Well, the GEMS difference, I think, still needs to stay
Yeah.
there, I guess, was my
Okay.
point.
Okay, why don't we do this? Rather than us giving a bunch of wordsmith right now, you've heard what Director Borchard has said. I'm going to kick the minutes back to you. There's nothing in the minutes that are so critical they have to be approved today.
Okay?
What I'd rather do is kick them back to you. Think about what he said with reference to paragraph 5. If there's some additional wording in there that will help clarify some of Director Borchard's issues, do that. And with regards to paragraph 6, make the adjustments and then bring it back to us. Let's just do that.
We'll do that at the July meeting.
Okay, that's next month's meeting. Everybody okay with that?
Thank you.
Okay, all right, let's just do that. Okay, moving on to action items. Item number 2, fiscal year budget. Gerard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Gerard Kapusik, Special Projects Program Manager in the Watershed Protection District, and serving as agency staff for this item. I am here today to provide you with a brief presentation overview of the recommended final budget, which we hope has been responsive to the direction that we understood your board wanted us to take in crafting the recommended final budget. And the point of the presentation is to try to be sure that we've captured that and provide any confirmation points on assumption decisions that your board may wish to have. So to that extent, I promise to go through this at a fairly brief clip. As your board wishes to engage in questions, I'd be happy to entertain them at any point in the presentation or at the end, whatever you decide. And then I think we will get to a point where the order of the topics in the presentation will reflect the action items that are being recommended for your board for final adoption. So to that extent, we have roughly 14 slides covering those 12 topics. We're going to start by the first slide, which is our internalization of what we understood your board's critical policy decisions that had budget implications that you took at the last meeting, primarily on the GEMS fund, overage, credit refund, and then also with respect to the issue of the work plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and answer any questions. Then we're going to break down the budget through its highlights, summarize the work plan tasks that are included in attachment 2B, talk a little bit about the history of public works charges, which will then serve as our placeholder account on the increased work plan cost until decisions are made about do we staff internally or do we buy some of those services through arrangements with other agencies or consultants. Then we'll talk about summarize the operating expenses, then the contingency reserve designation and how it's been used over time, go through the financing sources available to fund 0809, get to a key budget policy, fiscal policy question for your board, which is the precise revenue projection option you're comfortable with for groundwater charges next year. And then play out on a 5-year planning horizon the consequences of those decisions as they stand. And then summarize the GEMS fund and then have recommendations and proposed action. This slide, to the best of our ability, captures what we thought we heard your board say, which was referred to, I think, by the chair as option C+, which was essentially to preserve the $450K labor cost valuation of the core services in the core portion of the work plan, and to look at funding up to $150K extra and an increased work plan effort from the top 10 additional services list. And I might say, Director Borchard, you're correct, and to the extent that the budget language may have led to a different interpretation, that was not our intent. The point I was trying to get at in both the budget language on this is that from a fiscal capacity standpoint, the capacity maximum you gave us was 150 in additional work plan services. So that would translate up to the 600,000. Precisely how is, as you say, an evolving and interactive process between ourselves and the board. So at this point, that increased service level will be reflected in the PWAC column, but again, depending upon whether all of that is internal staff and therefore subject to PWAC, or some of that is purchased consultant or agreements with, for example, we're engaging in discussions with United about possibly joint sharing of a position, remains to be seen, and so we would move those recommend to your board moving those at that time. Your board was very firm, as we understand, about preserving $100K above the line for operating contingencies. And you certainly took the decision to issue a credit refund against future groundwater pump charges of the approximate $175,000 overage in the GEMS fund above the $200,000 cap. And you were looking to establish a projected year-end fund balance of somewhere in the range of $100,000 to $135,000 per year as we played this scenario out. So I guess my first question is, how well did we do in capture your decisions before we go forward?
Questions?
That's about it.
Dave? Mike? Dave? Mike? No. Okay.
Okay, that's good, because we use those assumptions in crafting both the 0809 recommended final budget and then projecting out a 5-year out-year planning horizon. Okay, to summarize in 0809, we have 3 major categories of fiscal policy review on the budget. How much of our total financing sources are available and how are they broken down? What is the anticipated expenditure performance for the next fiscal year among 3 broad categories? And then how does the subtraction of those anticipated expenditures from the total financing sources available at the start of the year result in a projected year-end fund balance on June 30th? Now, as indicated both in the budget board letter and the 2A spreadsheet, based on very little usage of the 100,000 contingency in 07 and 8, our projected year-end fund balance for 07 and 8, which is available for subsequent year funding, is $957,057 at June 30th. Of that, 335,000 in terms of 0809 adjusted extraction charges reflects the credit refund of the 175. If you agree with our estimate of the pump charge revenue, which we'll get to as a separate slide. So in other words, in 0809, because of the credit refund, we're not issuing an actual check to folks, but we're crediting that difference proportionally against the 2008-1 bill. So for that purpose, that revenue stream is reduced temporarily, and that's why that number is slightly lower. Projecting roughly a 3% interest rate. That's very conservative in light of market changes on a roughly an average $1 million balance through the course of the year for the county treasury pool. And then approximately 130,000 projected surcharge revenues, which are made up of two components: the next round of the Thornhill Miller settlement at 80,000 and a projection of about 50,000 in overpumping, which comports fairly well with the average over the last several years. Now, on expenditures, as you see, 74% of the agency's expenditures are identified in the labor charges, and again, it's at this point they're placeholder in PWAC, but if we do consultant and PWAC, we'll be spreading that amongst the others. There's nominal vendor service and supplies, 112,919, and then the 100,000 designation for operating contingency. And I want you to remember, and we'll come to that in a moment, on the operating side, the capacity reserve function of both the 600,000 and 100,000 as we play out in the next several years. So we'll come back to that. If, in fact, all of this happens as is, we are projecting a 639,360 projected fund balance in June 30th of 2009, of which 200,000 plus an estimated 5,000 in interest will be sequestered for GEMS. Again, 60,000 of the Thornhill Miller, 30,000 of the first 2 years unallocated because your direction was only use up to 50,000 will be there. And then the amount available for subsequent year funding, that excess balance, drops to 274,360. So that takes us through our first full fiscal year if all of these assumptions come to pass and interact in the way that the budget is identified. Now, again, to summarize, in your packet under item 2B is the detailed work plan, which includes the core costs or the core tasks, and then the additional services that are prioritized primarily for fiscal order. But Director Borchert is correct. The intent here is that as we, first of all, these are our best estimates of what the numbers will be, and they're not cast in stone. Secondly, as we work together through economies of scale and latent efficiencies, we may find better ways to skin these cats and reprogram some of these dollars. And then finally, as your board is asked, when our quarterly reviews, we'll be confirming with you. But I think that that's fairly self-explanatory. So essentially, we are able to, under this assumption, purchase somewhere between 1,500 additional hours of labor effort, either in PWAC or in consultant and PWAC charges, towards the tasks. Again, in terms of 5-year history of PWAC charges, you see that on an FTE basis, they've ranged from just a little under 2 FTEs up to 2.5 this current fiscal year, and then with the projected increase, it would be about 3.3. And again, this is just a measure of the level of effort at 1,800 productive hours. There are a whole range of WPD staff that are utilized as the need requires, and that's part of the advantage of the capacity of having WPD staff available to tackle this. We always strive, as does the private sector, to match the right skill set at the most cost-effective level and not have administrative burden. So this essentially gives you an understanding that the labor services that are provided this agency are generally equivalent to 3.3 full-time people, if in fact that were the case next year. As you see in terms of operating expenditures, this table looks at the projected next year versus the year-end projected for this year and against the 4-year average. And you can see that there are really, other than the PWAC discussion and the work plan discussion, which is obviously a new factor and an increase, significant increase, things are pretty well in line with the way they've been working, particularly on the non-labor costs. As you see, the service and supply totals next year are 112,919 compared to 109,000 over the 4-year average, so we're in the ballpark there. But then when we include the above-the-line contingency, it's the 212,000, so the 812,900 total expenditure number which presumes that we spend the entire 600 and all of the 100K next year, gives us a great deal of cushion in terms of expenditure capacity. So that's a good thing, provided your board continues to support that level. There's been a few questions about, well, why do we have a contingency at a particular level? Again, rule of thumb budgeting, anywhere from 7.5% to 20% of your operating budget for contingency, depending upon your specific conditions, falls within the sort of the common sense fiscal test. This table just compares what has happened in the agency. The top column is the total the agency's budget during those fiscal years, the amount that was budgeted for contingency. It's the percentage it reflected of total budget, how much of that was used, and then how much unused was added to the year-end fund balance to essentially increase your balance to carry over for next year. And of course, in 08-09, it reflects your policy decision. We just don't know at this point how much would be used and unused. The simple relationship is the less we use, the more the fund balance for next year is. But it's available for reprogramming as necessary. Again, a good fiscal capacity, conservative situation, if your board continues to support that. Again, the projected financing sources for the budget for next year, this table essentially points out from left to right the average over the last 4 years, the 07-08 actuals, the preliminary budget, and then the slight variation in the 08-09 final recommended budget. The most significant policy issue here, and we're going to get to a second slide in a moment, is the precise level of extraction charges that we're budgeting for groundwater pump charges next year. In the preliminary budget, we identified a $462,400 figure, which reflected 97% of what's known as the managed extraction mean, the period of time that the agency's aggressive groundwater management policies were in place, roughly 91 through 2006. In order to sustain this model, and in light of recent increased pumping in 07-08 and the likelihood of the drought facilitating that, we are projecting that you consider budgeting at 97% of the longer-term average, which is the higher number shown there. However, one time this next year, because of the credit refund, you have to back off that 175. So the net pump charges we would get next year, if you agreed with these assumptions and the credit refund is fully at that level, is $335,222. Then in 09-10, we get back up to the full freight, so to speak, of whatever number is used times the $4 pump charge. So that's the point of that table. This table simply summarizes your projection options. Effectively, between max and min, there's approximately 120,000 swing in revenue. If you wanted to comport and have your budget projection of pump charges identical to your safe yield, it would be 120,000 hit in revenue to the agency approximately. So this is a fiscal policy decision on how to do this. This has not been atypical. In spite of the resource challenge of the safe yield, historically the pumping has varied. Obviously, your board needs to decide clearly on how it wants to tackle this, but at this point that is the projection, 97% of the long-term mean rather than the managed extraction mean. Now, this is playing the budget scenario out over the next 5 fiscal years, and you can begin to see some of the internal challenges in the out years. Essentially, if all assumptions hold pass and your board approves as is, we're in good shape for the full next 2 fiscal years. As you can see, we steadily burn up that portion available for subsequent year financing. But then in fiscal 10-11, assuming again that we spend $600,000 in increased work plan charges each and every year, and assuming again that we fully utilize the 100 contingency, we have to look at potential adjustments on revenue, cost, or some combination no later than fiscal 10-11. Otherwise, in fiscal 11-12, we run into internal imbalances amongst the sequestered funds and overall cash flow below the target levels. So that is essentially how the future plays out under these assumptions. Your board obviously is in control of making the assumption decisions at the end. Everything is a trade-off. The bottom line is the more aggressive we are in working through the list and expending close to the 600 target, the sooner we burn up the fund balance. the more that that is less aggressive or the more that that is attenuated, absent any increase in pump charge, we've got a little additional time. So it's sustainable in the sense of these assumptions. The first 3 years solid. At the end of the third year, we better start talking about, and of course this assumes we're tracking every quarter as your board has required, watching closely, and I would suggest there's really 3 key metrics to watch for all of us. First, pump charges coming in. Second, how much of that 600 we're burning up in any given period of a fiscal year. And then finally, are we utilizing contingency at a level that's comfortable within the 100? And your board constantly, each quarter, since we'll give you those reports, will have that information. So in that context, we've done the best we can. This very simply, just to underscore the point about the credit refund of the overage, the intent here is to issue this in the 2008-1 statement, which normally goes out at the end of this month and is due August the 15th. Yes, Carol's right here. I wanted to acknowledge and thank Carol Schoen for sitting down with our staff and working with us to help us through this. We're still going to try to shoot for this, but we're going to need to push out the statement period by about 2 weeks so we process credits with this at one point in time. I don't think that's a problem since, as we say, we're backfilling the revenue, I want to say revenue loss, but the revenue difference from the fund balance available. So right now, our current thinking with Carol's help and Sheila working on this is we will issue those statements something around July 15th, and those payments will be due, the payments reflecting the credits will be due and August 15th. Now, if in fact our 60-40 split of pumping between the first period and the second period, 40% of the first period occurs, we would expect under these assumptions about $200,000 in pump charge bills, but if you credit adjust at 175, in essence 25K will net come in from that first statement under those situations. So if all that comes to pass, that's how that will play out. And then the GEMS fund will be sequestered at the $200,000 plus earned interest. The other critical thing is this funding plan assumes no spending of that GEMS fund. Your board has adopted a resolution that maintains advanced control of its expenditure, so therefore we have not projected its utilization. We don't know whether it will be needed to spend. If it is needed to be spent, then obviously the model has to be revisited because it continues to carry through unspent through the model. So I do want to make sure that that critical policy assumption is clearly laid out and understood. And then we're pretty much finished here. We just need to, you've confirmed the key policy assumption in the first slide. There might be some others as we've gone through. Hear your public comments, your deliberations, and we're ready to roll if your board is at that point.
Okay. Let me open it up to director questions. Anybody have any questions for Gerard? Okay.
Oh, I had one.
Yes, ma'am.
This goes back a way in your presentation there, Gerard, toward the beginning of it, but how many cats do you anticipate we're going to skin?
Well, since I favor dogs over cats, that's a good question.
Quiet. We're going to get ourselves in trouble. I'm going to pull rank here. Anybody in the audience have a question except for Rob? Rob promised me. In fact, I came from a meeting, a joint powers meeting. My brother chaired it, and he did that meeting in 20 minutes with 4 agenda items. So I can't compete with my brother. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But anyway, anybody have any questions on staff's presentation? All right, let's talk about, there is a recommended budget. Staff has done the things, I believe, that we've asked them to do. They've given you a presentation. What would you folks like to do? David.
My comment would be that last meeting we reviewed these additional work tasks, and I think I made the statement that the sum total of all of these tasks, if we spent all the money estimated that we were going to spend, they'd come into about $225,000. We've approved $150,000 this year. Let's say we do another $150,000 next year. We've got more than enough money, I think, to cover that additional work. Now, certainly some of it's going to be kind of ongoing, but the studies, the reports, a lot of what this additional work entails, I think will largely be finished whenever it is finished. Maybe it's not done in 2 years, but, you know, say we've allotted in money for it in 2 years. Gerard correctly said that that $600,000 expense level is an assumption being carried out over 5 years. I don't think that's probably a necessary assumption for this agency. I think that it's probably a overestimated assumption of what we're going to require in terms of funding. So if you take that into account, that changes the year-end fund balance number significantly in those further out years. And we find ourselves maybe, in fact, not being in a declining situation, but in a increasing situation. And if that is in fact true, and I'm just, again, this is all theoretical, I suppose, but if that is in fact true, I think we need to review reducing the pump extraction charges so that we can kind of more operate in terms of what we bring in, not carrying such large balances. And I think there's a real concern about this agency being flush with cash, and I think Director Kelly mentioned at one time, one of the previous meetings, about being raided. Now, some people don't think that's realistic, but I think it's a worry. So those are comments that I would make.
Anybody else?
Well, I was going to say, I think that's probably a future budget agenda item, because I don't think that was, I don't think the item today was couched in terms of pumping fees, other than it's included in the budget. So as far as what's on the agenda today, I would support approving the budget as presented.
Okay.
The budget for the coming year.
Okay, is that a motion?
Sure.
All right, we have a motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, and discussion. I guess my comment would be that I think you could spend literally hours on end playing what if against assumptions. And I'm not sure in the business that I'm in we'd have ever predicted we're paying $130 a barrel for jet fuel, $175 a barrel for jet fuel, and literally putting the airline business at the brink of being destroyed worldwide. And right now, Continental Airlines is projecting that that oil is going to go to $200 a barrel, and we got to survive at $200 a barrel. So I'm not sure that in our little world of water that we ought to get into the speculation business. I lean more to the fact that we've held the pump charge constant. We raised the pump charge with a surcharge to deal with some litigation issues. We've adjusted that back off. We've made a decision to manage those dollars correctly and to refund it back to the pumpers. And we recognize that we've got tasks that have to be done. I have no idea how many hours they're going to take. My assumption is that it'll probably take more work than you think it will. And so I'm not, at this point, willing to go out and make 9 different assumptions so that I can make another adjustment today. I think what it requires is that we do the tasks, we keep the pump charges constant, we refund the money that we said we were going to refund, we do the task. As the tasks come online, we evaluate, and if we click them off faster than we anticipate, if your assumptions hold, we always have the right 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now to make other adjustments. Whatever we approve today, we're going to go through this process on a routine basis, and it's that point in time that we need to make those adjustments. So I would support approving the budget as it's presented. I think the big issues that we ought to send to our constituents is that it's clear this board pays attention to the budget, staff pays attention to the budget, the audience pays attention to the budget, and we've kept the numbers constant, and we're going to make a major refund. all in the first, well, in a month and a half from now. I think we're doing the constituents' business, and we reserve the right at out period points in time to adjust the budget again, either up or down, to reflect the actual conditions that we're presented with, so we don't have to make a lot of assumptions. So I think the concern about spending the public's money wisely is the valid concern, and I think we're doing that, and I think this budget reflects that. And a year from now, I'll hear argument to either raise it or lower it or refund it, and that'll be a valid discussion at that point in time. So, anybody else? Comments? Mike?
I was just noting on page 11 of 11, item 2, Gerard had made assumptions of what the future, so I defend Director Borchard on questioning his assumption. Gerard was driving a car with a little defects, maybe it didn't know if he's going to make the trip. But I think that we easily could meet him, and we'll see when that comes.
Yeah.
As good politicians, we'll maybe be diselected by then, and our successors will deal with it.
Well, I think we all have to make assumptions going forward. And that's the problem. The key is that we have a right at some future point to test those assumptions based on the facts and make the adjustment at that point in time. And I think there's sufficient time to make those adjustments at that point in time. So anyway, I support the budget as it's presented. We have a motion, a second. Anybody else in the audience have any comments on it before we go back to the board? Rob is still banned from coming forward, so just for the record.
Mr. Chairman, I call for the question.
Okay, let's have a roll call, please. Yes.
Yes.
Director Keller?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, that's done. Thank you, Gerard. All right, let's go on to the, where's my list? Oh, item number 3, amendment to the GMA Thornhill Settlement Agreement. Who's going to do that?
Agency counsel will give that presentation.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair Mulhart, members of the board. Item 3 is a proposed modification to the settlement agreement between the GMA and Thornhill Mutual Water Company. Also signatories to that agreement are United Water Conservation District and Pleasant Valley County Water District. Both of those agencies have already approved the proposed modification. And in essence, what this deals with is a concern by Thornhill that once the surcharge has been paid, that the liability for that and the potential penalties for non-payment will no longer be a concern to any potential purchaser or lender on the property. This modification will in no way affect the planting and irrigation restrictions that are part of the settlement agreement, and will in no way jeopardize the GMA's ability to enforce the collection of the surcharge. So the recommendation is that your board approve the modification.
Okay, and you said it, and that I went, frankly, one ear and out the other. I didn't quite catch it. PV has already approved this?
Yes.
And United has approved this? We approved it? Refresh my memory, I think.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Did you want to say anything on it, Rob?
Only if the board has any questions. Rob Sawyer, representing Thornhill Mutual Water Company. Thornhill wants to thank Mr. Bawada, Tony Tremblay as agency counsel for United, and John Matthews from Pleasant Valley. This was just a little drafting glitch in terms of what happened to the stated maximum financial penalty, and as your agency's counsel has stated, it doesn't affect any of the other enforcement tools, but it removes a drafting glitch that might have caused a title problem. Thornhill and the Miller entities are very grateful to the other agencies for working to get this resolved, and also want to thank that the 2008 installment was paid about 10 days ago, and immediately your director, Jeff Pratt, got the request out to Farm Credit for the reduction on letter of credit without any delay, for which Thornhill thanks Mr. Pratt and the board as well.
Okay.
It's pretty straightforward. If there are any questions about it,
All right.
I'd be happy to answer them.
Charlotte had a question.
Yeah, I'm not a legalese person, and I still don't exactly understand really what this does. I didn't have the agreement when I was reading this, and this doesn't have a red line, so I don't know exactly what words are changed. Are these two paragraphs completely added, or what? On page item 3B2 of 4, which aren't, yeah, it has that remedies for failure to cure the default. I gather this is where the change is, but where in these two paragraphs is the change? What changed?
Subparagraph B of 10.2 is the new paragraph.
That's an additional paragraph.
Right. A is essentially a restatement of the original paragraph, and the issue was this. The idea behind the settlement was that pending full payment of the settlement, that if an installment was missed or there was another economic default, the full surcharge penalty, which had been charged at $1.3 million, less anything actually paid to that date, would become due and payable. The issue with this, and this is one that council had begun discussing some months ago, it became apparent, is that under a literal interpretation of just this paragraph, if it just stood alone, at some year in the future, if the penalty had been paid completely, and then there was a surcharge bill for 1 acre foot of water at $725, the penalty for that would be another $1.3 million, and that was not necessarily a direct concern, immediate concern to either Thornhill or the agencies, but the concern was that any lender, like Farm Credit or somebody coming in wanting to loan money for farming operations, or a purchaser of the property would look at that as a potential title risk that all of a sudden the most minimal default under the agreement would create a $1.3 million lien against the property that would go back to the recording of the conditions that were part of the settlement. So that's why, with help from Agency Council 10.2b was created, and what it does is basically says that automatic $1.3 million penalty no longer applies once the financial part of the settlement is paid off, but also reiterates that all of the other remedies that this agency has, including going in and getting an injunction, asking for money damages, that they still apply.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, good. Thanks, Rob. We need a motion to adopt Resolution 2008-05.
So,
I moved to it.
Oh, I'll
Your
withdraw.
second. I'll give you the first, I'll take the second.
Okay, Charlotte made the motion, correct?
Yes.
And Mike seconded it. Any questions? Dana?
Dana Weishart, United Water Conservation District. I just wanted to point out that when you do format this for signature, you change the signatory for United Water Conservation District to Bruce Dandy, who is now our president. B-R-U-C-E-D-A-N-D-Y.
That's why I asked if United has approved this, because that signature's not right.
Right. Dandy, D-A-N-D-Y. Thank you.
Okay. All right, very good. Thanks, Dana. Okay, we have a motion, a second. Anybody? Other comments? Board member comments? Roll call? Aye.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, very good. We have executive officer report, a number of administrative items.
Move to receive and file.
Motion to receive and file,
Second.
a second. The next meeting is July 23rd. I believe historically we're dark in August, as a heads up for everybody. Correct. Okay. Before we go, Rob, this is your chance. I will now turn the floor over to you. Anybody, anything? By the way, thank you for your work on helping do this rebate, refund, credit process. I look forward to seeing my numbers like everybody else. Anyway, I thank you for doing that. So, Anybody else have anything? Going once, going twice? Closed.